Have you ever wondered why losing feels so much heavier than winning ever does? You already know this feeling. Everyone does. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why it happens, and why your brain has been doing this to you since long before football even existed. Let's get into it. Your team just lost. Penalty shootout. Last kick. It hit the post. And right now, in this exact moment, you feel something heavier than sadness. Heavier than disappointment. It sits in your chest like a stone. Here's the strange part. If your team had won on that exact same kick, you would not feel an equal amount of joy. Not even close. The loss hits harder than the win would have lifted you. And that is not in your head. That is not you being dramatic. That is one of the most well-documented patterns in human psychology. It is called loss aversion. And once you understand why it exists, you will never watch a match the same way again. In the late 1970s, two psychologists named Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky ran a series of experiments that would eventually win a Nobel Prize. They asked people simple questions. Would you rather be guaranteed to gain $50 or take a coin flip to gain $100? Most people, strangely, avoided the safer choice more than logic would predict. But the real discovery came when they flipped the question to losses. People would take wild risks to avoid losing $50. Far wilder risks than they would take to gain that same $50. The pain of losing something was not equal to the pleasure of gaining it. It was roughly twice as powerful. Twice as powerful. Sit with that for a second. This means a loss and a win of the exact same size do not cancel out in your brain. They are not opposites on a balanced scale. The scale is rigged. Losing $100 feels worse than gaining $100 feels good. Losing a match feels worse than winning that same match would have felt good. So why would evolution build a brain this unfair to itself? Because for most of human history, losses were not symmetrical with gains. They were existential. If your ancestor found extra food, that was wonderful. A bonus. Life continued either way. But if your ancestor lost their food stockpile right before winter, that was not a bonus removed. That was potentially the end. Losing meant starvation, exposure, death. Gaining meant comfort. Losing meant catastrophe. A brain that weighted these two events equally would have made fatal decisions generation after generation. A brain that treated loss as the more urgent signal, the one demanding more attention, more memory, more emotional weight, kept its owner alive longer. And that is the brain you inherited. Every single one of us is descended from ancestors whose brains screamed louder about losing than they celebrated about winning. Neuroscientist Brian Knudsen at Stanford University used brain imaging to map exactly where this happens. When people anticipate a gain, a region called the nucleus accumbens lights up. Pleasant but measured. When people anticipate a loss, a completely different region activates. The anterior insula. And the insula does not just light up. It floods with intensity that looks remarkably similar to physical pain. Physical pain. Read that again. Losing is not just metaphorically painful. Brain scans show your insula responding to social loss and financial loss using the same circuitry that responds to a burn on your hand. Your brain genuinely cannot fully distinguish between watching your team lose in the final minute and experiencing a small physical injury. This is why the missed penalty does not just disappoint you. It hurts you. Literally, neurologically, the same systems that process a stubbed toe are involved in processing that ball hitting the post. Now think about what happens after the match ends. You replay it. Over and over. The exact angle of the shot. What you would have done differently. What the players should have done differently. This is not random rumination. Psychologists call this the negativity bias, and it has its own dedicated machinery in your memory systems. Researcher Roy Baumeister, in a landmark paper aptly named Bad is Stronger Than Good, gathered evidence across dozens of studies showing that negative events are remembered in greater detail, processed more thoroughly, and influence behavior more powerfully than positive events of equal size. A win gets celebrated for an evening. A devastating loss gets replayed for years. Ask any fan about a heartbreaking defeat from a decade ago, and watch how vividly they can describe it. Ask the same fan about a routine win from the same season and watch the details blur. Your brain is not malfunctioning when it does this. It is doing exactly what it was built to do. Threats and failures get filed away with more urgency because, evolutionarily speaking, the thing that almost killed you was more important to remember in detail than the thing that simply went well. But here is where it gets even more interesting. This asymmetry is not just personal. It is social. It spreads. When your team loses, you are not just processing your own disappointment. Psychologist Robert Cialdini coined the term burgeoning, basking in reflected glory, to describe how strongly people attach their own identity to a team's success. But the flip side is darker and stronger. When the team loses, fans don't just bask less. Studies on sports fan identity, including work from Edward Hurt at Indiana University, found that fans whose team lost showed measurable drops in self-esteem and even predicted worse outcomes for themselves personally in unrelated tasks, like estimating their own skill at darts or trivia, immediately after a defeat. A loss that has nothing to do with your own competence still convinces part of your brain that you, personally, are somehow less capable. That is how deeply identity and group outcome become entangled. And there is one more piece of this puzzle that explains why the misery seems to spread through an entire stadium, an entire country, within seconds. Mirror neurons. When you watch despair on the face of a player who just missed the most important kick of his life, specialized neurons in your brain fire as though you experienced that moment yourself. This is partly why crowds grieve together so visibly. You are not just watching his loss. Some circuit in your brain is rehearsing it. So here is what is actually happening in the seconds after a missed penalty. Your insula is firing in a pattern that overlaps with physical pain. Your memory systems are flagging this moment for long-term, high-detail storage because negative events get prioritized. Your sense of identity, wrapped up in a team you have never met in person, takes a measurable hit. And mirror neurons let you feel an echo of the player's own devastation as if it were yours. None of that happens at equal intensity when you win. The biology is not designed to be fair. It is designed to keep you alive. Now think about why this matters beyond football. The job you didn't get weighs heavier than the raise you did get. The friend who stopped calling occupies more of your mind than the friends who stayed. The one harsh comment lingers longer than the 10 kind ones. This is the same circuitry. The same insula. The same ancient bias toward loss that once kept your ancestors alive on a savanna and now quietly distorts how you weigh your own life. Understanding this will not make the sting disappear instantly. But it changes what the sting means. It is not proof that the loss was uniquely devastating, or that things are worse than they are. It is your ancient nervous system doing exactly what it has always done, treating loss as data worth remembering more than gain. So the next time the ball hits the post, or the next time anything in your life feels disproportionately heavy compared to its opposite, you might recognize it for what it actually is. Not weakness. Not an overreaction. Just an old, finely tuned alarm system, still running the same code it ran 100,000 years ago, still convinced that losing is the one thing it cannot afford to underestimate. Your team lost. The kick hit the post. And the weight you feel right now is not irrational. It is exactly what 3 million years of evolution built you to feel. So that's the real reason losing hits harder than winning ever could. Not weakness. Not drama. Just an old system, still doing its job. If this changed the way you think about that feeling, even a little, do me a favor. Hit like, it genuinely helps this channel grow. Share it with a friend who needs to hear it too. And subscribe if you want more of this, because there's a lot more hiding in your brain that nobody's ever explained to you properly. See you in the next one.